would be put in the black box alone with the door closed, and it's pitch black, and there's nothing but a big cake of ice.
Old Hollywood is filled with horror and gruesome tales. But whatever happened to the children of the golden time?
I like, what do you like? Beans and oyster stew.
My name is Hannah Shirley Alicia, and let's blast to the past.
To the future!
The creature of the night has a body. Tell me about it. Stir.
How do I look?
The 30s was a time filled with pain, job loss, and the Dust Bowl. But movies were gaining more traction as people needed a way to escape from the cruel realities of their time. At only 25 cents, you could see a movie and live out your life on the big screen. Stars like Judy Garland, Shirley Temple, and much, much more have a different version of events, unlike what most people saw of them. And you can really tell just how crazy her life is because she made an autobiography in the 1980s called Child Star.
I wanted to wait until I felt I was old enough, and of course now at age 60 I am. And this has taken me 8 years to write.
On all your own? You
Yeah, on my
didn't
own.
collaborate with anyone?
No. No ghost.
And very candid, open.
Yeah.
Was that hard?
Yeah, it's embarrassing. Some of the things are kind of embarrassing. But if you do an autobiography, you have to tell it like it was.
Temple was born April 23rd, 1928, which makes her a Taurus. Her parents were Gertrude and George Temple. Her mother was a homemaker and her father became a banker. Her mother was born in 1893 in Chicago, Illinois, and in 1910 she would go on to marry Temple's father, George. He was born in 1888 in Pennsylvania. Temple was born in Santa Monica, California, but shortly after would move to Brentwood, which is a Los Angeles suburban neighborhood in the West Side region of LA. She had two older brothers named George Jr. and John. Both brothers were quite a few years older than her. George would go on to become a professional wrestler, and John was a special agent with the FBI, as well as the director for a hospital. Educational Pictures signed Shirley in 1932 after her mother would take her regularly for classes for singing and dancing.
Well, my mother put me in a neighborhood dancing school.
This was where?
The Meglin Kiddies.
I mean, in what city?
Los Angeles. And Ethel Meglin was in charge of the studio. And Mother put me there because I had so much energy that she thought I was going to tear the house down. So she said, let's do something with this. So at 2.5, she put me in dancing school.
To give her an edge, her mother started styling her hair in ringlets the year prior. She would practice every single day and soon became a professional.
And as fate would have it, a kind of a not-so-great producer came into the dancing studio one day and lined all the kids up to do a time step, and I didn't like his face. And so I hid under the piano. And as fate would have it, he said, I want that one. That was me.
First film was at the young age of 3, was a series called Baby Burlesque, and at the time had received rave reviews, but looking back, it was a lot more sinister. Temple would go on to say in her book that it was a cynical exploitation of childish innocence.
That was
What was
my
your
story.
first movie?
It was called The Runt Page. It was a baby burlesque, and it was a takeoff of the front page. They did takeoffs in these 10-minute movies of popular films of the day.
All the young children would dress in adult-themed costumes, but with diapers fastened with safety pins. And I'm not going to show you any of these photos, but they're a little bit not good. Let's just say that. Not good. And I don't want anyone being in the comments like, oh, you just think that's not good because you're weird. No, it's weird. Okay, it's weird. Even Shirley says it's weird herself. So she would receive $10 a day for her work, which translates into $216.26 in today's currency. They would go on to make 8 short films called Runt's Page, War Babies, Pie-Covered Wagon, Glad Rags to Riches, Kids in Hollywood, The Kid's Last Fight, Politics in Washington, and The Kid in Africa. When children in these films, including Miss Temple, misbehaved, production employees would lock them in windowless rooms.
Well, during my starlet time at 3.5 to 5, there were 2 sound boxes on our set.
Much like a sound booth, and make them sit on a block of ice or make them stand in the room. This was later recalled as the black box or the punishment box.
And if one of us misbehaved, and I was in there several times, I would be put in the black box alone with the door closed, and it's pitch black, and there's nothing but a big cake of ice.
Temple said she didn't view this exactly as child abuse, but as something that helped her push her towards her goal of becoming a star. But she would experience horrible earaches and colds, which most likely came from this form of punishment. Temple would write, "Its lesson of life, however, was profound and unforgettable. Time is money, wasted time means wasted money means trouble." Throughout filming, she was sent to the box several times, but later would say that it didn't damage her mental health, but honestly, I can't help but think otherwise.
They took advantage. They kept the mothers out in another room. That's the only time my mother was away from me. When I told her about the black box, by the way, in the car going home one day, she said, "Oh, you have such a vivid imagination." She just couldn't believe anyone would do anything like that.
And there wasn't just child abuse, but as well as animal abuse. So if you're like me and you do not like hearing animal abuse, I will be putting a timestamp right here so you can skip this part. One incident where an ostrich had a bag over its head in one scene, and as they took off the bag, it became scared and knocked into cameras and as well as the cart that was holding Shirley and her co-star. The ostrich slammed into a wall and passed out.
That was uncapped in January, and the crane was we were both supposed to be doing a jig, and the crane looked at my eyes, and we were the same height, and he wanted to eat them.
They go for the eyes.
They go for the eyes.
Yeah.
So after the studio saw what he wanted to do, can I tell this inhumane story? They nailed the crane's feet to the floor.
Oh.
Yeah.
But they said that
Just one nail through.
The little web.
Didn't hurt him, the web part. And he still wanted my eyes more than ever.
Yeah.
And like she said previously, time is money. She didn't mean that lightly. Several times she was brought into filming despite being sick, such as the day after she went through an operation to lance her eardrum. Which, if you're like me and you have no idea what that is, it's an operation where a tiny incision is created in your eardrum to allow fluid to drain. And there was another instance where her foot was injured badly, and of course they made her still dance on it. But she did consider herself to be outgoing and full of life, always wanting to do the hard stuff, never letting people push her to the side.
A bunch of...
herd of horses.
A herd of horses, wild stampeding horses. And my mother wanted me to have a double do it. Little boy they had handy with a wig on. And I said, no way, I want to do that myself. It was really fun to run in front of those horses, timing-wise, and then climb up in the rocks. And if I'd tripped, we wouldn't have had to worry about the book. I wouldn't have been here.
By 1933, Temple was seen dancing in a movie theater lobby by Fox film songwriter Jay Gorney. He recognized her as one of the girls he saw in the movie that he was just coming out of from seeing. He then got her to do a screen test for the movie called Stand Up and Cheer. She won the part and was immediately signed to Fox Film Corporation, where notably most of her famous films are from.
Well, after the bath and after the prayers, I would be in my bed, and she would sit down on a chair next to my bed, and if it was a new script, she'd read the entire script to me, playing all the parts. And then we would do just the scenes for the next day, and just go over those 3 times, and she'd play the other parts, and I'd play my own. And by morning, I'd just know it cold.
She never described her mother as a stage mom, but as someone who legitimately had her best interest in mind, and in some interviews, she was often asked how she was able to cry on command. And unlike most moms, where they would say horrible things just to get these poor children to cry on command, like they would say things like, "Your dog died," or even go as far as hitting them or pinching them. But Gertrude never let this happen to little Temple, and instead she worked on acting exercises like making your mind blank.
Is because of my mother. And I dedicated my book to my mother. I love my father and my brothers a lot, but my mother and I, from early, were partners and we were pioneers. Neither one of us knew what we were doing.
Much of her characters in these productions would be described as an emotional healer. often playing the mediator with family members, and most notable, she was always an orphan or had only one parent. Her characters would fight with homelessness and heartache, but in the end, always triumphed. And this wasn't just on accident, but on purpose, because during the Great Depression, this came as a light at the end of a dark, depressing tunnel. She was that little girl, that brightened everyone's smile, and became a great inspiration to others dealing with the same problems that her characters were dealing with. She was also the first white girl to be dancing with a black man, Bill Robinson, otherwise known as Bojangles.
We were the first interracial dance couple on the screen. And in the south of our country, any scene where we're touching hands would be cut out of the movie for the South. Now, of course, that was all pre-civil rights, so now they can see the whole thing.
Robinson was born 1878, so he was quite older than Temple, but she always expressed how he never looked down to her and always treated her as an equal. She often stated that he was the best teacher she had ever had.
He was very important to me. And the way we would do it, we'd hold hands, and he'd give me 1 squeeze if we were doing well, 2 if it was pretty good, and 3, we got to do it again,
He started off performing for a local minstrel show, which, if you've never heard of those, they definitely were deep-rooted with racism and considered to be a show of mockery towards black people. Often they were played by white men with their faces and body painted black, but for Robinson, he was one of the first performers without the use of blackface. Blackface was also used in one of their movies they starred in together called The Littlest Rebel. To hide from Confederate soldiers, Shirley's character used shoe polish to darken her skin. Let's be clear, this was in itself not a good idea. But Shirley was a child, and this is at fault with the production team and as well with her parents. And there was another time blackface appeared in one of Shirley's films called Dimples. And I mention all this stuff because I think it's really important to discuss all the parts of history, and taking out history is not a good idea. We've seen what that has done. Robinson was often called an Uncle Tom, but he hated this wording because he didn't think that the public understood how hard it was to be a black man in the music and film industry. He died in 1949 when Temple was just around 20 years of age. Unlike her relationship with Robinson, she has dealt with serious essay stories at the hands of powerful men in Hollywood. Like MGM producer Arthur Freed, at only 12, Temple recalls meeting privately with the so-called producer without parental supervision.
He was going to talk to me about a movie he wanted to put me in. I'm 12 years old, And I thought he was a producer, but instead he was an exhibitor. And I'd never seen anyone naked before, except myself, so I had no clue about what was happening. And so it struck me so funny, I laughed at him, and I laughed uproariously. I had tears, and he got infuriated, and he said, out, 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 go.
And while she was in a room with the producer, so was her mom with the co-founder of MGM, Louis B. Mayer.
Ushered her to his couch and came over and sat on the couch and took her hand and said, you are a beautiful mother, and you should be a star. I can make you a star. And he put his hand on her leg, and it wasn't mano morte, it was a moving hand. And so she got up with her purse and backed out of his office. She came out very quietly from Louis B. Mayer's office, and we walked hand in hand silently to the car, which was unusual. We got in the car driving home. I said, Mom, you won't believe what happened to me. And I told her what happened, and she got kind of quiet, and she said, well, you don't know what happened to me. And Louis B. Mayer wasn't as bad as Freed was to me.
But he tried to...
He came on to my mother. And so we both decided that we didn't like MGM much. It was, it was better at Fox.
I'm editing, and I forgot her mom's response was like that. Probably not the best response to give to your daughter. Arthur Freed was born September 9th, 1894 in South Carolina, where he began his career as a sound plugger, which is a vocalist or a pianist that would help promote new sheet music. This guy would even go on to win an Academy Award for Best Picture, not once but twice for his work on An American in Paris and Gigi. He died in 1977 from a heart attack at the age of 78. Honestly, it takes huge guts to out your abusers. I know most of these people that she's outing were passed away during these interviews. And not to mention, not much people at the time were speaking out against this. This wasn't like the Me Too movement. This was like pretty rare to see. And unfortunately, that wasn't the only time she was subjected to these powerful, hungry, obsessed men. At 17, producer David Selznick sexually harassed her. The story goes that Anita Colby, who was the artistic director for the producer, had warned Miss Temple of him, saying, "Be careful if you found him in stockings." This gave Temple the impression that sexual advances were used as a condition of employment with Selznick, and soon she would understand the full picture of what exactly Miss Colby was warning her about. Coming around my side of the desk, he reached and took my hand in his. Glancing down, I saw the telltale stocking feet. Pulling free, I turned to the door. But even more quickly, he reached back over the edge of his desk and flicked a switch I had learned from Colby was a remote door locking device. I was trapped. Like the cartoon of Wolf and Piglet, once again we circled in reverse directions around his furniture. Blessed with the agility of a young dancer and confronted by an enormous but overweight producer, I had little difficulty avoiding passionate clumsiness. Thankfully, he wasn't successful, but he did not get fired, and he had no repercussions, and he was not arrested. Nothing happened. Selznick was born May 10th, 1902. He was the son of Louis J. Selznick, who was a silent film producer and distributor. He studied at Columbia University and would move to Hollywood. He also died from a heart attack at the age of 63 in 1965. And from my research, it seems like Shirley Temple was the only one to speak out against him, so that was brave enough in itself. There are much more horrifying tales the young actress went through, from her own relatives to complete strangers. At just 10 years old, she found herself to be a target against a mother who had recently had a daughter pass away. Well, not recently, but it was 10 years prior. During a radio performance for Silent Night at CBS, the Grieving Mother brought a rather big gun to the show. Supposedly, her daughter died 10 years prior on Temple's birthday. This made the mother believe that her daughter's soul was trapped inside of Temple.
Just before we did the show, I was looking out the window in the dressing room, and Mother was doing my curls, and as usual. And I saw a woman searching the windows and looking kind of angry, and when she saw me, she looked really angry and shook her fist in the air. And I said, that mother, that woman doesn't seem to like Shirley Temple.
So the mother thought hurting Temple would release her daughter's soul.
Her daughter had died the day I was born, and she thought I'd stolen her daughter's soul. And what she didn't realize is that Fox Studio took 1 year off my age when I got there, and it was the wrong soul anyway.
Wrong birthday anyway.
Thankfully, the woman was not successful in this, obviously. She was apprehended, and the young actress was safe, but I feel like this is a lot to handle. And Shirley talks about it like it just, is normal. And even Temple didn't know she was a year older than she actually was.
My mother told me on my 12th birthday that it was really my 13th birthday. And I remember I cried a lot after I heard it, because I thought I'd lost a year. Where'd it gone?
She has said that most of her fans have been positive besides a select few.
There were some mean fans in the old days. I mean, that one lady who tried to pull a curl, she thought it was a wig. And the car was leaving in Boston in 1938. And the window was down because the photographer wanted a picture. And she reached in and pulled, and the car started off. And, I thought, that's the end of that. But I have a strong head and strong hair. But sometimes they get a little rough, yeah.
Early 30s, Temple's salary went from $10 a day to $250 a week, with an additional $15,000 bonus for every complete film. and soon was later raised to $35,000, but was only given $13 a month in pocket money, even at her highest of making $10,000 a week. And overall, Temple was in over 40 movies, ranging from extras to the main star, which doesn't even include all the short films she was in. As an adult, Temple found out that despite making $3.2 million in her name, she only had $44,000 by the age of 21.
And they hemmed and hawed, and it was a 2.5-hour meeting in our house. And finally, I said, give me bottom line. What do I have? Well, they said, out of the $3,400,000 or so that I'd earned, I had $44,000 in my trust fund. That was it. And that was a shock.
Yeah, were you ticked?
No, I think I would have paid the studio for the privilege of working, and I think I did.
And while her father lost most of her hard-earned money, the star has said she didn't feel disappointment or anger towards him.
I didn't blame him. Dad left school when he was in the 7th grade, and he was a banker during the Depression. And when he managed my money, it was just overwhelming, I think. And he was like an innocent led to slaughter. I think the people who counseled him did the bad job. I don't blame him a bit.
Her father was a banker up until she reached her peak of stardom and had to quit because of mothers coming to the bank and showing off their kids' tap dancing skills. So most, if not all, of the money that they were making as a family was coming from Shirley herself. At only 15 years old, Temple met her first husband named John Agar Jr. Now, he was quite older than her. I believe he was 22, if I did my math right. Might have not, but he was a sergeant. She married him at the young age of 17.
Girl in my graduating senior class in high school to be engaged and to get married. I mean, that's not a great reason.
John George Agar Jr. was born January 31st, 1921. He grew up in Chicago but moved to LA after the death of his father. He met Temple through his sister and asked to escort her to a party. And eventually, because of his association with Temple, his acting career was launched. He starred in several movies, but over time moved to TV. Shirley and him would even appear in 2 movies together called Fort Apache in 1948 and Adventure in Baltimore in 1949. Not only did he have a drinking issue, but he also dealt with infidelity. She had one child with him named Linda Susan. They would call her Susan, and a year after her birth, they divorced. He remarried 2 years later to Loretta Combs and would have 2 boys with her. Susan would drop his last name as well. Not even a month later, she met her husband Charlie, who was an intelligence officer during World War II. And about 11 months later, they married on December 16, 1950. Charlie was born Charles Alden Black, March 6, 1919. He had many different titles, like assistant to the president of Hawaiian Pineapple Company and a manager for a TV station. They would meet at a cocktail party in Hawaii. It is said he had no idea who she was, and that was a big reason she was drawn to him. 3 years after their marriage, she gave birth to a son named Charles Alden Black Jr., and a year later, they had a daughter named Lori. Her first daughter, named Susan, the one she had with John Agar, actually changed her last name to Black. And while her life as a movie star was over, she slowly would transition to TV, with shows like Shirley's Storybook, which would be renamed as The Shirley Temple Show. She also did TV appearances on popular shows like The Red Skelton Show and Sing Along Mitch. Despite her childhood being filled with stardom and her first husband not being cool at all, she still managed to pursue a career outside of acting.
The real reason for leaving, though, more on a practical basis, was that I was tired of the world of make-believe and wanted to live in the real world. I was just through with make-believe.
So she wasn't just a housewife or, a child star. She was also very interested in foreign affairs and politics. In 1967, she ran as a Republican for California's 11th congressional district, but lost. She wouldn't stop there, but she would go on again and lose a few more times. While she took some time off to raise her children and focus on other aspirations in life, in 1972, Temple was diagnosed with breast cancer and a radical mastectomy was performed on her. A year after she beat cancer in 1974, it was announced that she was appointed delegate to the 24th United States National General Assembly by former President Nixon and became the ambassador to Ghana.
Can you train ambassadors?
Yes, it's a 1-week seminar on how to manage their job overseas, their personal time, and what to do if taken hostage.
Her husband died at the age of 86 in 2004. And only 10 years later, Temple would die in 2014 at the age of 85 from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is a progressive lung disease that can be caused by smoking. You probably would never, ever see any videos of her smoking or people talking about how she smoked, but she was a smoker for quite a long time. But she didn't want anyone to know about her smoking because she didn't want to be portrayed as a bad role model or a person that's glorifying smoking. Our next series will be focused on child star Judy Garland and her rise and fall to fame. But if you've made it to the very end of this video, thank you so much for watching. It makes me so happy to make longer content like this. But as always, I post every day on TikTok and on Instagram. More on TikTok, less on Instagram. TikTok, I do videos like this, but obviously shorter, condensed versions. And on Instagram, I focus more on my vintage shop, which I just opened. So if you would like to go visit and maybe purchase some of my vintage pieces that I've sourced all throughout Indiana, you can check it out. And thank you so much for blasting to the past with me. It is so nice. Thank you.
I loved every bit of my life. The bad parts, because we all have to have them, and the good parts. And I wouldn't change the bumps and bruises and warts and all that for anything.